All right. Good afternoon, good noon, and good morning, everyone, depending on where you're located. My name is Bill Murphy. I'm a civil engineer for Bowman Construction Supply and ASP Enterprises and Quick Supply Company, and most recently, Cascade Geosynthetics. So with me today are Tom Bowman of Bowman Construction Supply, Rocky Mountain Bioproducts, which is a division of Bowman Construction Supply. We also have Bill Agnew with us. So Tom actually is the president of Rocky Mountain Bioproducts, division of Bowman Construction Supply. Tom has been involved in the erosion and sediment control, ecological restoration, and mine reclamation industries for over 19 years. He works closely with landscape architects, engineers, federal, state, and local government agencies, U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, EPA, mine managers, and independent consultants on their reclamation projects. He also assists in value engineering solutions for projects, focusing his efforts on building healthy soils for a natural plant growth and long-term establishment for long-lasting results. He is always willing to make site inspections to help customers or participate in turf inspections, particularly on golf courses. With Tom is Bill Agnew of Agnew Environmental Consulting. He is the owner, and it's a small firm specializing in vegetation selection, management, establishment, soils evaluation and enhancement, erosion control, water quality mitigation, and land management strategies for the seed, mining, energy, utility, erosion control, and reclamation industries. William has a bachelor's in wildlife biology and a master's in range management from Colorado State University. William is a CPESC and is responsible for and contributed to over 25 professional publications. I think Tom is going to start us out. He's hosting the presentation on his computer, and then we're going to let William Agnew let us know if I made a mistake in calling him Bill, if he has a preference of either or what all he answers to. With that, Tom, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. And welcome, Bill Agnew, with me. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hopefully, everyone's doing well and in good condition at home, in your office, wherever you are. So this will be kind of a tag team presentation. Really, it's based on vegetation management. And we're going to talk about organic fertilizers, soil amendments. We're going to talk about vegetation as well, the below ground aspect of it as well. Hopefully you learned something from this, and hopefully we drive enough questions to have a good question and answer session at the end or somewhere afterwards with the follow-up emails. So with that said, what do we need for soils and plants? So soils, organics, fertilizers, soil amendments are some of the things we're going to talk about today. To kind of start briefly, and this is pretty much old hat for most of you, I believe, but something we like to touch on is soil is really consisting of about 5 things: that organic matter, your minerals, your macronutrients and trace minerals, water, air, and that atmospheric volume in soils is a little bit more important than other people think or that people forget about. And then most importantly, really what drives the soil life is those microorganisms. So when we take a look at soils around the world, or around the United States, I should say, there are really 12 dominant soil classifications with over 70 different types of soil in the United States. So take a moment, look at this map, and take a look at where you are, and you can see how vastly different soils can be depending upon where you are in the country. And not to mention, this also touches upon the fact that once we start scraping soils on a project, it changes that even more so. So with that said, I really tune this over to Bill Agnew for him to take over.
And Bill Agnew may need to request remote controls from you there, Tom.
Yeah, but I'm getting to him. Sorry.
You want to keep sharing your screen and then just go to share the remote controls, or he can request them from you.
Yep. There you go, Bill.
Okay. Good morning. Hey, Tom had alluded to the fact from a soil standpoint, look at all the different soil types. And again, this is almost like a ecological 3-size soil map. And similarly, you can see with an ecological level 3 ecoregion map of vegetation in the United States, there are some real strong correlations between the vegetation and the soil types throughout the United States. So vegetation is really key, whether you're down in and with that, the soils that you're dealing with, whether you're down in the Sonora or the Mojave Desert, up in the Great Plains or the Intermountain West. So why do you want vegetation to start with? Obviously, you're out there, you've disturbed the vegetation, then you have a mandate to try to get that vegetation back. Everything that we're talking about here from a biological standpoint and a soil standpoint really is a contributor to try to get that vegetation reestablished in as quick a time frame as possible. So why do you want vegetation? Well, there's some obvious things that it helps mitigate the impacts of rilling and gullying on roadsides or other disturbance areas. And it's really important from a water quality perspective as well. When you have those open areas, in this case, you can see the vegetation, but upstream, there was a disturbance. And as a consequence of that, you've got considerable problems with water quality and downstream location. So you talk about that. By far, the greatest source for plant materials out there is seed. So some of the basic environmental requirements for seed germination establishment, you can get cuttings, you can get individual plants, you can get sod type of, but seed is by far the one plant material that is used in more situations than any other. And what do you want? You want viable seed. You want sunlight in order to get the process going, moisture, soil temperature, oxygen, and then a soil platform. The plants need something to enable to grow, just like you're feeding them. So the soils have to have the nutrients that you need in order to get germinate and established on the side. So some of the seed basics from a specification standpoint. So you're specifying plant materials. You're looking at pure live seed or PLS. They're required. You might require a seed supplier to provide you with an actual lab test. If there's questions, that way you might be able to look at individual lots purity or germination, the amount of weed content, the inert content. All of those are divulged on the actual seed laboratory test. You can either get your seed as a mix or as individual species in bags so that you could mix it yourself. If indeed you specify a mix, and for some reason, and there's very likely would be the case, you might have some species that are not available, then what you need to do is go out and look for substitutions, and then you can inquire within the native seed community to see what might be available in the marketplace. When it comes to keeping that seed in place on that soil, what you need to do is look at the various different types of erosion control materials, specifically and particularly when you're dealing with slope applications. The erosion control materials need to last almost as long as the first growing season of the seed. So you want to make sure that you do have a good erosion control material to stabilize that slope and keep the seed in place so it'll germinate and grow. So the material that you have, so that would allow the erosion control or the plant materials to take over that function of erosion control after the first growing season. You might want to consider performance-based specifications. And then when you have questions, contact local professionals, seed companies, NRCS, others for individual insight into specifications and what you might expect. So when you look at, again, some of the seed basics, perennial versus annual plant materials, and oftentimes in seed mixtures, you might have a combination of both. Perennials are typically species that germinate and they come back on a year-to-year basis from the individual mother plant. Or an annual species, an example would be a grain crop. It shatters seed on the soil surface, and those individual seeds need to germinate and subsequent over time in order to get reproduction on that site. So perennials take a little bit longer to establish. They put more energy into the root systems. They may not germinate. They may sit there dormant in that soil profile for an extended period of time. but they do provide excellent long-term erosion protection. It requires a little bit slower nitrogen release rates, and some of them work and some of them don't. That's where working with a local seed company and a seed professional would give you the insight to ensure you're using the right plant materials for your project. Compared to an annual comes up very quickly. Again, that would be almost like a cover crop. They're very short-lived. They reseed or don't. Many of the grain crops reseed. There are some sterile materials in the marketplace where they would actually provide then some germination, but you wouldn't have any seed shattering associated with that plant. If you do it too aggressively and if you don't get the right precip, sometimes it'll be fairly aggressive and crowd out some of the perennials. And there's a possibility to create some weed problems associated with as well. But oftentimes that's not going to be the case when you deal with annuals. So just looking at this, so you can see there's the perennial root system in a soil profile compared to the annual plant materials in a soil profile, stabilizing that for considerable stability. So in summary, just briefly, vegetation is going to be your best long-term solution to mitigate your erosion control, and proper soil fertility will significantly enhance the performance associated with those plant materials. Kind of remember as you get into the process, and many of you, this is old hat, but you want to remember the basics: good seed, sunlight, moisture, all help in that growth requirement to grow plant materials. You want to define the community that you want to establish, and your end result is a plant community. Do you want it to be a grassy community? Do you want it to be a shrubby community? Those then come down to plant material selection. You want to select certain percentages of individual woody species in your seed mix so that the annuals or perennial grasses and forms don't outcompete it. So you also want to select the best plants that are suitable for your site. Oftentimes that's going to be native plant materials. Always it's going to be native plant materials in a restoration situation. In a rehabilitation situation, that's more like putting it back to a pasture and hayland type situation. Use a plant material guide to estimate your seed rates. Realize that certain species you have thousands of pounds of seed or tens of thousands of seed per pound, and other species you have millions of seeds per pound. So putting something in at a specific rate based on seed size is really important to do that. So you want to strive for a balance of soil quality, erosion control, plant selection, to reach out to ensure that you have a sustainable plant community. And you want to inspect your applications and track the field results to the degree that you can. I'm going to turn it over to Tom now. Tom, you there?
Yep. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. So with that said, Bill touches on a lot of great points with that. And one of the things that he touched on is the soils there. For us, soil sampling is probably the most economical, the wisest thing you can do. I often tell people you would you would not call a doctor and describe what the rash looked like or the symptoms or, just how you kind of look and ask for a diagnosis. That's a little bit more prevalent in today's world with this COVID issue going on, but really that's not the way we would ever ask a doctor to treat us. So why would we treat our soils the same way when we're trying to grow something in them? So here we have two different types of soil. It's interesting here. We have topsoil there on the left. I know a lot of us on projects don't get to see that type of soil very often. We think that what there's on the right is topsoil. That's actually a photo of a concrete mix. So yet, to be honest with you, I typically get that concrete mix looking soil more often than not. And then you ask someone saying, hey, stockpile your topsoil. And when we look at that, this is what some of our contractors have done. This is a CDOT project in Colorado. This is how they stockpiled it. And so really when we look at this, and we'll talk about this briefly here in a little bit, but there's no way to keep the microbial life alive in a soil stockpile like that. It's imperative that if we stockpile a little bit differently, or we manage our topsoil a little bit better. So things to amend with. So we've got a Biosol product that is an all-natural organic fertilizer, plant-based, filled with beneficial bacteria and fungal biomasses, has no animal waste in it. It's high quality. It's really the byproduct of penicillin and other antibiotics. So those go through a fermentation process. And I always equate that to this is that, you know, if we were to eat barley and hops or eat grapes is one thing, but if we were to drink grapes after they'd been fermented, or we drink the residue of barley and hops after it's been fermented, it's a completely different product. And so therefore that fermentation process organically binds and stabilizes our nutrients to produce a very long-lasting, slow-release multi-nutrient and soil amendment, which is going to promote soil life and health, soil health. So our Biosol Forte is a 721 product. Like I said, it's 95% fungal and bacterial biomasses. It's over 75% organic matter. Only 0.5% of it's even soluble. So out of that 7% nitrogen, 6.5 is insoluble. So what really makes it different? What makes these products different? Well, it's that fermentation process. So as I like to tell people, you can't really go by the numbers. That'd be like telling you every pizza is the same, every steak is the same. So you cannot go by numbers in this case. And in many cases, those numbers don't add up, or they don't equal the release rate, as we'll see. So again, the product's high in organic matter, which is going to hold and stabilize soil particles. It's going to store and supply soil nutrients for plant growth. Biosol has been shown to, that after one application, it builds soil humus 7 times faster than natural succession does. And then lastly, one of the interesting things, 1% of organic matter is the same as 10,000 pounds of organic matter per 1 million pounds of soil. So it's got a lot of water holding capacity in that. Your fungal biomass that's in our Biosol is going to absorb food from dead and organic matter. It's important for nutrient cycling and water dynamics in that soil, which is another key when we're dealing with poor soils. By adding that fungal biomass, we're really helping that nutrient cycling, and we're converting hard to digest organic materials into food. And then lastly, the good fungi outcompetes the bad to promote a healthy soil. While our bacterial biomass feeds other soil microbes, keeps nutrients in the root zone, but one of the neatest things it does is it filters and breaks down pollutants in the soils. So if we're working on maybe a mine site, maybe we're working on an oil pad, it helps in breaking down those soil pollutants. And then really, probably some of the biggest, two of the key ingredients in the Biosol is, the first one is our Mycelium. Mycelium is the vegetative part of fungus. You can't look up Mycelium without it referencing mycorrhiza. It is the vegetative source for that mycorrhiza. It's the most stable part of the fungus. It enhances the relationship between plants and mycorrhiza. And this is how Biosol really promotes the mycorrhizal growth in those soils. We love to see mycorrhiza spread as well on projects, especially with highly disturbed soils. But it's a natural reoccurring in healthy soils. So we're actually trying to promote that. What you see there on the right is when you see, that's your mycelium growing, but think about the times you've driven across the plains or the grasslands and you see that little spider web effect along the grass. That's actually the mycelium growing in healthy soils. The second ingredient that's really key and unique in the product is chitin. chitin is the exoskeleton of shellfish or of fungi. It's like shellfish in the sense that if you peel and eat shrimp, it is what you peel off is the chitin off that shrimp. It's insoluble in water. It's resistant to decay. It has polymer capabilities where it will retain 3 to 4 times its weight in water. It acts as a disease suppression. But one of the coolest things about it is if you look at that lower right-hand photo, it's kind of got like a web and some pores, and that's an ideal place for microbes to live and house. Secondly, there's a good amount of carbon in this product as well. You know, I know biochar is a hot topic in today's world, or has been for several years. But again, the carbon is the basis for soil fertility. It's also, again, you see that structure there on the right in the photo. It's an ideal housing unit for microbes. It helps release nutrients for plants, promotes the structure and biological and physical health of soil. Again, carbon in general doesn't provide nutrients, but it's a big contributor to housing more microbes to increase that. And lastly, it really helps the cation exchange capacity. So who does the work of the soils? Well, we know this, that there are more microbes in a third of a cup of soil than there are people on the earth. It's a little hard for me to grasp. I actually had to contact people and even look this up to really confirm that that's true. But that includes the fungi, the bacteria, the worms, and nematodes in the soil. You know, erosion and fallow soils destroy soil life. So really, microbes are the microbes and biodiversity rules in the soils. So what do some of these microbes look like? You now understand where I think some of the movie producers get some of the faces of the characters they produce in some of these movies. But so when we are applying this, our goal is to take this overburdened soils, these highly disturbed soils, and produce them into effective, productive soils for plant communities. So when we look at this, Biosol is really affecting the top 3 levels of the soil food web. You know, we're adding organic matter for plants, and there's nutrients in there that's going to feed the plant. But we're also adding the bacteria and the fungi in that second level, in which in turn is also feeding the third level of shredders, predators, and grazers in that soil food web. So really, this isn't about feeding plants. Again, it's about feeding the soil and producing healthy soil. So back in 1998, Caltrans, UC Davis, and the Federal Highway Department did a study. And I know it's an old study, but boy, these are hard to get duplicated. But they took a wide range of products, and you can see it there listed on the chart. They had the Biosol, they had a coated slow release fertilizer. That was simply a urea product. They had poultry byproduct. So this was actually a chicken manure product. They had compost, ammonium phosphate, and then a composted mix, which was a humic acid along with a urea product. And they put it in basically a sand column, flushed it with nutrients, or flushed it with water, and the goal was to get nutrients to come out as quickly as possible. So it's a little exaggerated, but as they say, when you stretch this out over time, the Biosol basically mimics what native plants want. And it's what they really found was the nutrient value does not equal nutrient release. So something imperative to note, that just because a specifier or a contractor or someone wants to use maybe a 10-10-10 over a 7-2-1 product, or maybe it doesn't mean it's going to last longer. And not all 7-2-1 or 6-1-1 or 5-2-4 products are equal. So it's kind of the point of this slide here. So really, the long-term benefits of Biosol is due to the chitin. It's got the ability to improve and change soil structure and build that soil humus, retain soil moisture. It's long-lasting. It does not promote a quick green up. That's the one thing we try to drive home, that, you know, using the right product in the right places. This is not a quick green up. There's other products on the market for that, typically manure-driven products. But I don't know many natives that are going to germinate in the first 10 to 30 days. This was a test plot out in Missouri. And we show this largely because it was just a side-by-side. This had actually some mycorrhizae on both plots as well. The interesting part of this is that the turkey manure plot who had mycorrhizae on their plot, they had a single species mycorrhizae. So you see the differences between a single species in a short-term nutrient versus a long-term nutrient with a multiple species. Creek realignment is areas up in Helena is a job there where we were used. Biosol was used up in a Superfund site called Block P. Soil pH on this site was 1.3 when they started. And if you look at the water quality there on the right-hand side of that picture, you see a difference in the water quality there as well. And then look at this, is one application 10 years later, yet it's interesting, and I really just noticed this a couple months ago, but you look at the soils on the re-veg site, it's basically gravel. It's almost pure rock, what they were growing out of. And again, creek or stream channel restoration. So we work with a lot of pipeline revegetation. We've worked on airport jobs. This was a Army National Guard airport up in Wyoming. Very little moisture on this site. And then we've done big projects and dramatic projects. This was Elk City Slide Project. Was 2008, 2017 is when it happened. And this whole area slid down the hill. The contractor had approached, they called in and said, why don't he prescribed the prescription of Biosol, some humate and mycorrhiza. And they told him that's going to be a failure. He said, why don't we apply it and give it some time to grow before you tell me it's a failure. And yet we see here, after the first growing season, and this is year 2, and we're waiting for year 3 photos of that. And then lastly, steep slope construction, areas where people think, well, nutrients aren't going to stay on the site. It's too steep. We're not going to be able to keep seed on the site. So this is basically a vegetated wall almost, with like a kind of a terraced, as you can see, and then seeded right directly there into the wall. And then fire reclamation we've done too. And Bill's in touch on the good case study there as well for us here coming up. So we've even dealt with flower beds. So really, we look at communication as the key to this. And we run into contractors all the time that say, hey, we have a site. This was a site in Colorado. They had asked the county told the contractor they wanted to rip everything out and start over. Our point to them was, why don't we salvage what's there? Let's retreat what's there, use the existing blanket that's there, and not try to help the landowner have a little bit more, save some money in this process. And so this was a project that was done over a few months, and you can see the results there in a wetland restoration project. We ended up saving the contractor, in a long story short, save the landowner about $70,000 on this project by just going in and retreating what was there. They were talking about importing soil that was worse than what was already on site. So really, it comes down again to raw materials to fermented products, and that aging process of it, that fermentation process, changes these ingredients and these raw ingredients to being a better, more stable source of nutrients for plants. And with that said, that leads us right into that mycorrhizal fungi that I had talked about. So to cover mycorrhiza quickly, mycorrhiza stands for fungus root. Mycos, fungus, rhiza equals roots. And it's that beneficial relationship between specialized soil fungi and roots. Mycorrhiza, like I said earlier, is a naturally occurring symbiotic beneficial soil fungi that's going to enhance the root development of plants. And about 95 to 98% of the world's plants have a mycorrhizal relationship. that mycorrhiza gets, in return, the host plant gets fed from the fungi while the retrieving nutrients and water for the plant. And in turn, the plant's producing sugars from the photosynthesis process to feed that mycorrhiza. So this is what we call the below ground connection. And one of the reasons why Bill wanted, and I want to talk about the plants and the seed of that is because this is a key element to it. So here you see the below ground. You see the yellow main taproot. You see the white exterior, but all the small white filaments you see there is the mycorrhiza. They are much smaller in diameter than the smallest root hairs, and thus able to explore a greater volume of the soil, and they're able to absorb more nutrients out around the surrounding plant. So what's it look like? So this is up close. This is the mycorrhiza hyphae coming off of the root. And if you can see these areas right in this area where you can kind of see it looks like a garden hose. That's where these nutrients get transplanted back and forth from. So what does mycorrhiza do? Well, it releases a powerful enzyme into the soil that unlocks hard to capture nutrients. So in many of these sites, we see areas where when we get a soil sample that says, hey, you got parts per million of phosphorus or potassium available. Well, this is actually able to sometimes go out and recapture what's not necessarily available and make it available for plants. It can build a natural microbial system, which greatly enhances plant growth and yields. Forms that, like I said, it forms that intricate web that captures nutrients, conserving the nutrient capital in soils, while increasing in plant roots 100 to 1,000 times larger. Also helps reducing the use of fertilizers. So a lot of times when we value engineer a project, you will find us many times reducing our application rates of maybe a fertilizer because of the using mycorrhiza. So it really increases plant quality and soil health. So here's a small photo of kind of an animated photo of what it looks like. So really, when you can get mycorrhiza to come off the side of a root, it's actually able to go out and retrieve more nutrients and water and help that plant with environmental stress. Non-mycorrhizal root doesn't have that. All your weeds are non-mycorrhizal, by the way. So great photo here to show that symbiotic association and capturing a renewable source. So this is a small pine tree, as you can see there. And if you see the clusters here of areas where you can see it's almost like attacking something, it was finding, this mycorrhiza was finding some of the needles that were in the soil mix and trying to retrieve nutrients out of those pine needles. And again, so lastly is you remember seeing that stockpile topsoil. When you look at that, we get the, if you disturb the top 3 inches of soil, we're destroying about 55% of the mycorrhizal life in the soil. But if we start disturbing 9 inches of soil, we destroyed 97% of the mycorrhizal life in the soil. So here's a little before and after. Here's a little test plot with kind of a combination of things between mycorrhiza and fertilizer and a control. And so what's interesting about that is we did a project up in Central Oregon, and this is what it looked like 7 months after sowing. It was seeded basically in September, October. The guy who did this wrote the book on revegetation for the Forest Service. And as he said to me, he said, this is what most of it looked like in September 2004. Plants were small, 55% bare soil. I would argue that there was more bare soil than that, but that was his comment. And so he called me and was just frustrated, not knowing really what was he going to suggest. And, I think we have a problem. So he went back and turned the corner in July of 2005 and said that it couldn't have been more beautiful. He goes, all the native plants had finally expressed themselves. Says, come July of 2005, bare soil was less than 15%. Native plants accounted for most of the cover. And so you see the cover there is what they did. So really his drive home message was, it can take several years for native plants to fully express themselves and dominate. So it's imperative that we be patient and express that to, again, it comes down to that effective communication, express it. Another test plot of Biosol and Mycorrhizae on a site. This was this site got over 100 inches of rain a year. Couldn't keep things on site. Whether it was nutrients, even sometimes the seed on site. And then across the street from that, they really shot the same mix into a gabion wall. They had some blanket in it with some topsoil, but they shot everything into that seeded wall. And you see the difference there. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to, as I mentioned, Bill's got a case study on the car fire, and he will take us through that. So Bill, you've got control, and go right ahead.
Thank you, Tom. You know, we've talked about plant materials, and we also have talked about fertilizers, low release fertilizer, and Biosol and Mycorrhizae. Here's a case history. This is the Western Shasta Resource Conservation District. They got a grant from the state of California Water Quality Control Board to do some revegetation on the Carr Fire. And the recovery was both in Shasta and Trinity counties. The fire started July 23rd of 2018 near the Carr Power Plant on the Whiskeytown National Recreation Area. Ultimately, the fire destroyed 1,600 homes, over 1,600 homes. There's about $1.66 billion in damages, and they spent $159 million just in suppression costs. It was contained on several months, or actually the end of the month of August of 2019, after burning about 229,651 acres. Very hot fire. As a consequence of that hot fire, you can realize that much of the entire soil surface was scorched a number of inches down into that soil profile. So the beneficial or the seed, pioneer seed species that are in there, the mycorrhizae within that soil profile, were essentially eliminated. You can see much of the fire, the consequence, again, 1,600 plus structures that were burned. And then there was a lot of concern about water quality. So water quality, this was off of a roadway, burn area up above versus a tributary where there was not a burn in the upstream area that you see to the left. So really what they were looking at is trying to protect the fisheries in the salmon fishery in the Sacramento River. So there's a number of small tributaries that come off of that, that the RCD got money to do some revegetation on that area. So the State Water Quality Board, there was, about $4 million that they provided for this grant. And it was to protect the beneficial uses of the Sacramento River and its tributaries in and around the Carr Fire. It was a fairly small area that they looked at. They targeted about 1,640 acres for erosion protection. And then they targeted a number of different tributaries. If you've been to as you leave Redding and you go up the hill on Highway 199, you run across a variety of different drainages, and be the Rock Creek or Middle Creek or Salt Creek, the list goes on as far as the drainages and the mitigation. When it starts raining in the fall, these drainages start filling up with water, and you have migratory salmon that come up these drainages, small ephemeral drainages, once they start getting water in them. So they determined that vegetation really was the permanent long-term solution that they wanted. Here's what the area looked like pre-disturbance, before the fire, the native plant community. And that's what much of it looked like, over 200,000 acres following the fire. A lot of it very high intense burn, others moderate burn area. The target was on those very high intense severe burn areas where essentially the soils were scorched. So what they did was they came up with a materials plan. They looked at native plant materials, and they were applied at about 40 pounds per acre. They looked at native straw and rice straw applied as one technique. Hydraulic BFM was applied with another technique. Biosol slow release fertilizer was utilized. And then there was a single species mycorrhizal inoculum that was utilized on the project. The application methods, first there were two methods. First, there was a hand broadcast method. They used Conservation Corps individuals, CAL FIRE, Western Shasta RCD staff, and essentially what they do is they would spread seed onto the soil surface, they would put biosol down and mycorrhizae at the rates that I just showed you, and then on top of that they would spread the mulch. A lot of the mulch was native seed mulch from production fields. Crews of about 15 individuals on the average, you'd get 2 to 3 reclaimed acres per day. So pretty low production and pretty intense as far as the labor intensity goes. A lot of those bales weighed about 75 pounds. So when you start hauling those things for a distance, it gets pretty taxing. But that's what those areas look like in the spring. So this was done. A lot of this previous picture here, you can see this was done in December of 2018. This picture was March of 2019. You can see the vegetation establishing, good perennial vegetation as well as some annual vegetation coming in there. But the area was very well established as far as vegetation goes. That's what an area looked like where it wasn't seeded, compared, and you see in the background here where it was seeded with applications of slow release fertilizer, biosol, and mycorrhizae. The other application method was a hydraulic application. In this case, it was a bonded fiber matrix that was utilized, and it was sprayed on. So in this mix, there was a combination of the seed, the biosol, and the mycorrhizae within the single slurry, and it was placed in an application onto the soil profile. A crew of 3 individuals could do about 6 to 7 acres a day. All the materials were mixed in a single application, considerably less strenuous and much more productive, but it's more expensive to do it that way. You see another example of how the hydraulic applications in areas that had some high severe burn areas. This is an area in the fall. This is more probably, not that this was I believe in July of 2019. The permanent vegetation had cured out. Now you have a lot of standing dead material, and it stabilized that site very, very well. There was some sediment erosion control plots that were established on the area, as well as some cover grids to kind of look at and focus on the amount of vegetation versus non-vegetated areas, and see what kind of erosion rates that we'd be able to reduce the erosion based on vegetation planting. So, and here's those results. So the trial results showed that a straw application on most of those areas, high severe burn areas, in the fall of, actually that was May of 2019, there was 91% vegetation coverage on the average, with an estimate 6.2 milligrams of sediment coming off of those sites. It's more of a kilogram per hectare type of a measurement that they did. On hydraulic sites, there was 74% cover and then you can see a little bit more, less vegetation cover, more sediment loss. In this case, the control, overall the control showed about 33% vegetation cover, about 74 milligrams per unit of sediment loss on that area. So what did that mean? Here's what the site looked like untreated. Again, this was summer of 2019. That's a treated area, summer of 2019. So what did it mean? Overall, there was 898 acres that were hand treated through the spring of 2019. Hydraulic materials that was all done in 2019, through this 2018 into 2019. 265 acres were treated. So just based on the amount of soil loss, there was nearly 12 times less sediment lost on those areas that were seeded versus areas that were not seeded. That is huge. On those areas, that was a hand with the hand putting down straw at 2 tons per acre. On the hydraulic applied areas, a little over 4 times less sediment coming off of those areas. Literally tens of thousands of tons of sediment were saved from discharging to downstream locations compared to non-treated areas. So I think that overall the success of the project was very, very good. Tom, I'm handing over to you.
You got it. Awesome. So yeah, that's great information, Bill. And, you know, we've seen some of this stuff over and over again in the use of these products together. That's one of the reasons why we're trying to really take this message out to more people and express this. So who should be using these products? Well, you know, I know that we probably got many people that are represented right here in the DOT world, national parks, Forest Service, whether it's a landscape architect specifying it, even landscapers and contractors using it for planting, seeding, and transplanting. But we really use a wide range, or go to a wide range of industry for this, of people that could be using it. So what's the advantage? Again, using fermented products or products that work hand in hand with one another and kind of get that symbiotic relationship going together. They thrive off each other. So it's an efficient way to apply stable organic matter. It's really, you know, rather than ripping and tilling things in and hoping that, you know, if it's a compost product, rather than hoping that it's matured and cured, it's just a very efficient way to apply a stable organic matter. You know, we can customize treatments for a site. The beauty of this is we can really take a site, and again, that goes back to that soil analysis. If we can get a soil analysis, send it to us, mail it to us, send us just the report. We don't care what that looks like. We will take a look at that and get your recommendation off that soil analysis. Many times, the reason we like to do that is because it's a way for us to value engineer a project first and help you value engineer a project. If we don't get soil analysis, you know, I'll be honest with you, a lot of times we look at that going, well, we know what it's going to take to work, and we may over-engineer it a little bit because we want it to work. We don't want a contractor coming back, and I have yet to have a contractor come back to me saying, wow, that was a miserable failure. We have found sites where maybe something slid off the surface, or it was washed out, or it was blown away, but properly seeded, like Bill was talking about, with a good PLS pounds per of seed on the project, makes a difference. And it becomes a time-saving application for customers. I mean, if we can do it right the first time, and even reduce warranty work for a customer, what's that save not only the contractor, but what's it save a landowner? So that's the way to do it. And again, these things have been proven for over 35 years. This isn't anything new, but again, in these times of people working from home, sometimes looking for new ways, we just thought it was a great way to kind of touch base with a lot of our people, and those people that are looking for treatments such as this. So as we say, you know, it's your dirt, your site, it's your problem, but with our biosolution, we can give you a little bit of peace of mind for your project and for what you're doing. So what happens with poor soil prep? Well, poor organic matter material, again, it's typically a failure. This touches on one last thing is, you know, we see products talk about organic material and organic matter. And one thing I kind of did not touch on when we talked about organic matter is when we look at things and you take products, and compost is an easy one to pick on this, but I mean, and I don't mean to pick on compost, but I'm going to choose this. Everything gets started out as organic material. That's how it starts. I mean, even our Biosol starts out as organic material. It's cottonseed meal, soybean meal, it's, you know, sugars, things like that. It's all organic material. when it goes through a fermentation process, it changes it, just like compost. So you start out with leafy material, wood debris. When that gets composted down, you get a measurement of organic matter. That's the stable, most useful part and adds value into the soil. Organic matter is important. But what's the difference between organic matter and organic material? If you started with 100%, now you're down to like 75%, we would call that other 25% organic debris. It's not that it's bad, but it has no intrinsic value. It has no nutritional value to a plant. So that's really the difference between our organic material, organic matter, and organic debris, and where those come out to. So really this is, we're trying to take the art of building dirt into productive soils. So with that, I know Bill and I will take any questions. Our information's there on the bottom of that screen, along with the website. That website's also got local distributors for you in California, which is Pacific Coast Seed and S&S Seed out in California, who do a great job for us. And again, we are here to answer questions, or your local distributors can answer questions, but I think we got about 9 or 10 minutes, Bill. So any questions?
Tom, this is Bill Murphy. I am recording this, so we'll be able to post this on your website later. We'll capture the recording and have that available. But some of the questions, I don't see any of the Q&As in here, but I know in the past you've been asked, for soil sampling, what do you look for in soil analysis?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we really ask for a wide variety of things. We can work it off of a handful of different elements, but we would love to see things such as pH, pretty standard. What we don't always see as standard is organic nitrogen. We typically get an organic matter measurement. We also love to see like a CEC, a cation exchange capacity, sodium and salts, which are different. I've had contractors tell me that they're not. And then a full range of the nutrients. So if we can get everything from the macronutrients, your nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and all the way down through your iron, your calciums, your manganese, boron, and things like that is what we really ideally like to see. So, like I said, we can take a soil sample that someone's already had done, or they can send us a soil sample, and we will have it run. We typically use either Colorado State University or Colorado Analytical here locally. We've used other companies around the country as well. So
we do have a chat question that came in, and he's asking, is the material only surface broadcasted or incorporated?
Very good question too. All these materials can go through a hydroseeder. They, because they're high in organic matter, needs oxygen. The nutrients in organic matter needs some oxygen to break down, and it needs soil temperatures and water. So really our nutrients need those three elements to break down. So if they're incorporated, they can be incorporated into the top 1 to 2 inches, just not compacted in, because again, it needs that oxygen exchange. But like I said, we know it's 10 to 15% more effective applied topically. So yes, but it can be broadcast or it can be hydroseeded. So it's easily applied.
Good answer, thank you. And then this one could be answered either by you or Bill Agnew, and it's, maybe you mentioned it, but that's okay. It's always good to repeat things. Did the califier have any scarification or disking treatment prior to hand seeding or mulching?
No. They went out there and inherited what you're talking on the California fire there, the car fire. Yeah, it was just the debris, the service litter was there, and they kind of worked right around that. So there was really no scarification to the surface whatsoever. The material seed was put down, the biosol was put down, a mycorrhizae was put down, followed by then either the straw, native straw, or rice straw. And in the hydraulic application, all three materials were applied simultaneously in a single application.
Thank you. And another pre-planted question that I asked Tom Bowman to share so that it could help be sticky so we remember this information. How do we know what type of mycorrhiza that we need to use?
So, good question. So really there's two types of mycorrhiza. There's an endo and an ectomycorrhiza. If you're using native grasses, or I should just say grasses in general, you're going to want endo. If ectomycorrhiza is used for conifers, evergreens, and there's a few deciduous trees that will use both, both types of mycorrhiza, but predominantly, if we're doing grasses, you want endo. Now, within each of those species of mycorrhiza, of your endo and your ectos, there's hundreds of other types of mycorrhiza in those classifications. This is why one of the things we try to encourage is a multiple species mycorrhiza, because each mycorrhiza does similar things, but they're more efficient. Each one's a little bit more efficient in their own area. So you may find some that are more efficient at retrieving water, some more efficient at retrieving nutrients. And so that's really the benefit we see of using a multiple species mycorrhiza.
Last question, and then we'll wrap it up because we are doing great on time. How do these products compare to other biotic soil amendments?
Very good question. Again, and I will tell you, so that's the biotic soil amendment world is becoming, it's ever growing. It's we see companies out there that are applying like a peat moss with some other elements to it. Sometimes they're adding mycorrhizas, sometimes they're adding starter fertilizers into it. We're seeing other companies using fiber components, whether it's wood or straw in their biotic soil amendments, again with a touch of mycorrhiza. And the point of the biotic soil amendments was to apply kind of be able to shoot a refined compost onto a site to apply to get your growing media down quicker. My approach to this a little bit is the simple fact that I think they're great products, but I think you can do a wide range of things in value engineering. You can take sometimes your current soils and add materials to them to make them more productive in a valued way and make them more, value engineer it to get a better result rather than just throwing one product at it. And again, that's why we like to see soil samples. There are times where we want to add a humic acid to a site because it's low in micronutrients. So good question. Again, there's a lot of biotic soil amendment products out on the market. You just have to be careful as to what each of them provides. And, I guess my takeaway message from a lot of this is right products, right place is the right product, right place is what you want to use. So.
Well, and any other the questions we didn't have time to get to, we can do that in writing as a follow-up. Tom, you and or Bill can follow up to all the attendees. Any parting words there, Bill Agnew? We heard Tom's summary.
Oh, thank you, folks, for the participation in this webinar. We look forward to working with you to the degree that you allow us. So thank you, and good luck with your projects.
And a couple of you that just asked questions here at the end, and we are going to have to wrap this up because I have another meeting I've got to host. Please reach out to Tom Bowman or Bill Agnew with your questions and regarding cost or some of the other specifics, and they'd be happy to answer them. And we will share your names with both speakers. So thank you guys. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.